One of the big questions that religion is meant to answer is, what is the purpose of life? Or to put it more simply, why do I get out of bed every morning? Now, when we're kids, the answer is simple. We do it because our parents make us. And usually there's some goal, right? We're going to school, then we get good grades, we graduate, we go on to our post-secondary education, which might be either a trade school or college. Once we complete that, we start our careers. But somewhere in the midst, things change. Suddenly, there's not an adult, there's not a teacher or a parent or a military drill instructor telling us when to get out of bed and why. Suddenly, we have to make that decision on our own. Making the choice not only to get out of bed, but where to go when we do so. And this is hard. This is hard primarily because in the West, we exist in something called the Cartesian Duality. And what this is a French philosopher by the name of René Descartes famously said, "I think, therefore I am." And what he did when he made that statement was to separate the immaterial mind from the rest of the physical world. So I, Alex, am up here, somewhere in my brain, and I am separate not only from my physical body, but from the rest of the world around me. I am a subject surrounded by objects, and I must interact with those objects in order to understand and move through the world around me. Now, the Cartesian duality isn't completely terrible on its own. It gave rise to empiricism, which gave rise to the scientific method, and that's why we have things like indoor plumbing and electricity. So I'm not casting stones at René Descartes. However, I am stating that this duality becomes problematic when we step outside the realm of science and we try to answer the big philosophical and religious questions. Because if we accept the idea that the world is a duality, then that means that I, Alex, must look out there somewhere to find the purpose of my life, just like I have to look out there for everything else. And of course, no one gives you a map, so where do we go to find the purpose of our life? Now, we might think that, well, maybe my job can provide some meaning, some purpose, a firm foundation to stand on. And that's a good, noble goal, assuming we're practicing right livelihood. There's absolutely nothing wrong with taking pleasure. Let's say if we're a waiter and we're bringing food to customers and we see the smile on their face, or we're a carpenter and we get a sense of satisfaction from building a sturdy home for a family to live in, that is wonderful. The problem is that our jobs change. Maybe we get laid off from our job as a waiter. Maybe suddenly the industry slows down and people don't need us to build so many houses. So while it's very good to have a job, if our reason and purpose for being comes solely from our job, then we're lost once we lose that job, which we inevitably will because, as I said, things are constantly changing. So maybe we decide our family will be our source of purpose and satisfaction in life. We will devote ourselves wholeheartedly to being a spouse or a parent. Again, completely noble task, 100% in keeping with the Buddhist tenet of right action, the fourth tenet of the Noble Eightfold Path. The problem comes in that families, like jobs, like everything in the world, are constantly changing. What happens when the kids grow up and suddenly they don't need us anymore? What happens if our spouse decides they don't want to be married anymore? Suddenly the rug is pulled out from under us and again we're lost. We've lost the purpose and the meaning of our existence. What to do? Now, one might think the answer is religious practice, and that's part of the answer, but that's not quite it. And the reason being that while religion is foundational, the Buddhist teachings go back 2,600 years, the way we interact with the practice also is constantly changing. Maybe early on we have a lot of free time, so we can spend more time at the temple, meditating, studying sutras, giving offerings. But then we get a job. Then we move, and suddenly the temple isn't so easy to get to. We still engage with our religious practice, but in a different way. So if religion is the way we find meaning and purpose in life, we have the same problem we have with everything else. And I'm sure you're noticing a trend. If we try to find meaning and purpose in things that are constantly changing, we are constantly running the risk of having those things taken away, thus having the purpose of our life taken away. So what's the solution? Well, first, we have to move away from the Cartesian duality I mentioned earlier. Remember, as Buddhists, we don't really do duality. The mind, the body, the environment, all part of the same Buddha body. It doesn't mean that they are the same. You are not the chair or the couch you sit on while you watch TV, but you are interconnected and interpenetrated with all living things. So we don't need to look outside ourselves to find the purpose of our lives because, well, there's nothing outside of ourselves. We're all part, again, of the same Buddha body. So then, what is the purpose of our life? Well, it's whatever we happen to be doing in the moment. The purpose of a flower is to be a flower. That includes the growing from a seed, that includes the blooming of the blossom, that includes eventually passing away. The purpose of a tree is to be a tree. Again, to grow from the seed, to spread branches and leaves, to provide a home for squirrels and birds, and to eventually become a rotting log. The purpose of a cat is to chase mice. The purpose of a dog is to bark and run around in the yard. The purpose of a human being is a bit more complex, but it is more or less simply to be a human being. The purpose of your life is up to you. And as long as you choose something that's in keeping with the Buddha Dharma, that ends suffering for yourself and others, that is rooted in wisdom and compassion, you're fine. Now, you might say, well, what about that thing you said earlier about life constantly changing? Yes, life is constantly changing. That's why the purpose of your life also changes based on what you're doing. So in the morning, the purpose of your life might be to make breakfast. Later on, the purpose of life is to drive to the office if, let's say, you're a white-collar worker. Later on, the purpose of your life is to eat a meal with your family. Let's say it's dinner. Perhaps after that, the purpose of your life is to do some yard work, plant some flowers I talked about earlier. If we look to the present moment for the purpose and meaning of our lives, then we will never be disappointed, because the present is the one thing in the world that can't be taken away from us. So if we are focused 100% on what we are doing now, whether that's our job or interacting with a loved one, taking care of one of our animals, engaging in a hobby, if we make that the purpose of our life, we're never going to be disappointed. Now, this is good on the surface, but if I am honest, it can be a bit unsatisfying. As human beings, we are beasts of burdens. We need a yoke to pull against. We need a goal. And this is where the Buddha, with his infinite wisdom and compassion, steps in. The goal of our life is to end suffering for ourselves and others. We do that by realizing enlightenment. We realize enlightenment by living our lives in accordance with the Four Noble Truths and the Noble Eightfold Path. So as long as what we're doing in the moment is in accordance with the Noble Eightfold Path, as long as we are practicing right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration, we're okay. As long as we remember the Four Noble Truths that life is suffering, that suffering is caused by desire, that the way to end suffering is to end desire, and the way to end desire is the Noble Eightfold Path, we're okay. And as long as we're okay, what I've found is that a tremendous weight gets lifted off of our shoulders. We're no longer under pressure. We're no longer stressed out trying to figure out, what am I supposed to be doing? Because whatever we're doing in the moment, as long as it serves to end suffering, is what we're supposed to be doing. It is the purpose of our lives. And if we understand that we are not separate from the living beings around us, then we also understand that anything negative we do hurts all the beings in the world, and anything positive we do helps all the beings in the world. So everything we do is valuable, all of it. From washing the dishes to sweeping the floor, feeding our pets, working our job. All of it is important. All of it is a tool we can use to make life better, not just for ourselves, but for all sentient beings. We don't need to search for the purpose of life. It's already here. All we have to do is live. Amitabha.